Hello and welcome to the build review of the Bachem Ba-349 Natter from Brengun. This is a 1/44th scale plastic model kit and it comes with parts for 2 aircraft. I used both aircraft in my diorama here that I will show you in detail in a separate video. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't yet and if you want to see more about this small winter diorama. As usual, the building process started with the canopy. The cockpit is sufficiently detailed in my opinion, considering that you won't really see much of it when it's finished. Then I glued the launcher for the rockets in the front in place and added the nozzle of the Walter rocket motor. Finding the right alignment of those tiny parts was quite a challenge. Next I joined the fuselage halves together. The fit wasn't perfect, so I used milliput to fill the gaps. Fine sandpaper was used in order to get a somewhat smooth surface. Then I also had to rescribe a few panel lines. When that was done, I added the control surfaces. It took me a while to align everything, the most difficult part being the engine exhaust. This area where the wings have to be placed are recessed, which makes the assembly a bit easier. Now that the first model looked like an aircraft, I brush painted the cockpit. To mask off the clear part, I used liquid mask. I used a silicone brush to get a precise result. To glue the clear parts in place, I usually use white glue. It doesn't leave any residue on the parts and it's easy to remove if you need to do so. Then I started the painting process on the first Natter. I didn't like the painting options Brengun suggested, but found an interesting scheme in one of my books. It looked quite challenging, especially in such a small scale. Also I had to experiment to find the right colors. I started by airbrushing a base coat of RLM 79 on the whole aircraft. Then I tried using RLM 83 for the random patterns. However, this paint scheme seemed to be almost impossible to recreate at first. I just couldn't get the right ratio of paint consistency and air pressure on the airbrush to recreate such fine spots. I even removed the nozzle cap to get up close, but the result still looked bad. Furthermore, I tried different thinners and the drying retarder, but none of these mixtures worked. After many failed attempts, I also tried the stippling method with different tools. As you can see, I used brushes, a cotton bud, a sponge, and this makeup remover or whatever it is. I ended up using an old brush. After removing most of the paint from the brush, I painted on each individual spot. This took me a long time, but it was the most promising method I could find. The result was better than expected, but still a bit too uniform. So I sprayed on highly diluted thin coats of the same color. When that was dry, I masked off the upper side and painted the underside black. I still wasn't entirely satisfied with the paint job, so I brushed on highly diluted paint as a filter. Now I was finally happy with my paint job and it was time to move on to the decals. As you can see, there is only a handful of decals for each Natter. Still, this process was quite a challenge because the markings for the T-Stoff and C-Stoff fuel are the smallest decals I've ever used. When all the decals were in place, I used a wash to accentuate the panel lines. The kit also comes with stands for the 2 aircraft. To recreate the wood grain, I scraped fine lines into the primer. Then I used various paints to get realistic looking wood. Finally, I removed the masking liquid from the canopy. This was quite tedious and it might have been easier to use masking tape in this case. Last but not least, I used the thin wire to recreate the aiming reticle in front of the canopy. I don't know how many times I lost this tiny part, but in my opinion it's quite an important part of this aircraft. Now to the second Natter. I decided to create some damage effects on this one. So I took my rotary tool and started thinning the plastic from the inside and created holes. Then I also used a small hand drill and my hobby knife for the fine-tuning. The Natter was made of plywood, so the result isn't perfectly realistic. However, I don't know of any way to recreate splintered plywood in 1/44th scale. Someone suggested using frayed cardstock, but I'm also not sure about that. If I ever build another plywood aircraft, I might try this. Since the holes turned out larger than planned, I tried to add some detail to the interior as well. I cut out thin plastic struts to use for the frame of the Natter. I superglued these into the fuselage. All of this might seem like an easy task watching this video, but keep in mind how small this model is. Next up, I cut out a part of the wings. Again, I tried to add as much detail as possible by gluing tiny parts of plastic in place. This was quite a mess and not as realistic as I wished it would be. However, this wasn't the final result. As a next step, I used tin foil to cover the big hole in the fuselage. Then I repeated the process on the wing, trying to align the foil with a panel line so the height difference wouldn't be too obvious later. I had to work very fast because the super glue I used dries very quickly. When all the parts were in place, I just punched holes into the tin foil. Again, I know this doesn't look like damaged plywood, but for me the result still looked quite good. For the paint job, I wanted to try another different paint scheme. So after the base coat, I brush painted these random patterns all over the Natter with a fine brush. Again, this was very time consuming and fiddly. When all these wrinkles were painted on the upper side, I masked it off and airbrushed the underside black. The result after unmasking was quite satisfying. Then I painted these struts on the interior in a wood color. When all the decals were placed, I used a dark brown wash as a filter. I brushed it all over the model because it looked too clean and uniform. Then it was time to remove the masking tape. I used a toothpick to remove some residue of the tape. And that's it for the Bachem Ba-349 Natter in 1/44th scale. As I said, these aircraft are part of a little diorama. I'm still working on a video for that, so stay tuned for the final reveal with more details. You can already find some pics on my other channels linked below. So overall, I had a lot of fun building these tiny models, even if it was quite a challenge. The Natter is the smallest model I've ever built, and you have to be very precise. I got some criticism about the damage not being realistic. Yes, splintered plywood looks different, but so far nobody could show me how to achieve this effect in 1/44th scale. Anyway, I hope some of you still like the result. Please leave me a constructive criticism in the comments, and thanks for watching. Bye!